Good morning, all. Welcome to our webinar on Climate Change Insights 2021, organized by International Society of Environmental Relationship and Sustainability, ISERS. Thank you all for joining today. So we have come up with this topic in order to spread awareness on what is going around us and bring about a good action on climate change. So ISERS, is one of the leading professional associations meant for the development in the sustainable development of environmental planning, research, and management. Hence, as part of ISERS, it was our duty to spread awareness and bring about to you and discuss this topic on a global level. So today, with the help of two eminent keynote speakers from the environmental technology, we have come up to discuss on climate change and the insights of 2021. So firstly, I would like to introduce to you our eminent keynote speakers of the day. Firstly, I would like to introduce and welcome to you Dr. Ludwig Oscuro Federigan, who is an environmental advocate in Philippines and executive director of the Young Environmental Forum from Philippines, and Dr. Sudhir Joshi, who is district Ayurved officer, district Panchayat from Government of Gujarat, and the founder and director of SDG Brigade India. So today we'll be discussing on various topics such as biodiversity and climate change, sustainable development and climate change refugia, and many other aspects of climate change. And we'll be also discussing on how and where we can improvise and bring about a difference in climate change. So our first speaker of the day is Dr. Sudhir Joshi. Welcome, sir. And he will be discussing about the urgent actions to combat climate change and its impact. Welcome, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you. Fine. Good morning.
Good morning
To all. Myself, Dr. Sudhir Joshi. I'm a district Ayush officer in Government of Gujarat, India. And I have been associated with various UN agencies since last 5 years. And today I'm going to deliver a very brief session on the urgent action of climate change that is related with the SDG 13. So, my dear friends, researchers and colleagues, we are now in the era that we have to come forward for sustainable globe, and we have to follow the United Nations SDG 2030. So regarding the climate action, if we want to act systemically and strategically, we have to first focus on the indicator and targets of SDG 13. So SDG 13 is a universal and urgent call of action for all countries. It is related with the developing country and developed countries to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact by 2030. It's a long process. We cannot say getting result very easily. We have to apply systemic approach. We have to apply strategic intelligence for combating climate change and its impacts. The goal being actually adopted in 2015 actually is a follow-up, partially achieved through Millennium Goals, but we are not that extent that we can satisfy. So among others, the goal includes basically the strengthening the resilience, adaptive capability to climate related hazards and natural disasters, the integration of climate change measures into national policies, very important. It must be included in the national policies, and improved education awareness, rising movement. Not only involve the national policy, but to educate youngsters and a big momentum of awareness rising this climate change issues. It must be addressed, it must be involved, it must be focused. Human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation. This is also a very good area where we can work, where we can contribute, and where we can get a result. The creativity, technology inventions, and financial resources from government as well as stakeholders is very necessary to get optimum result through our teamwork or efforts. So these are the basic SDG 13 indicators which I have shown to you. And now over to main topic, that after pandemic, as we all know that we are suffering various post-pandemic conflicts in our education system, in our financial system, as well as in our health system. So urgent action, United Nations declared some steps for urgent actions. We will explore it later. But first of all, what happened after 2019? We have to analyze it. So 2019 was the warmest year on record. If we talk about 2010 to 2019, 2019 was the warmest year on record and of the warmest decade. तो पूरा जो decade, the whole decade was recorded as a warmest decade. Carbon dioxide level and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere rose to new record in 2019. So we have to first have to know the basic what happened in the atmosphere since 2019. And climate change, as we all know, is affecting every country on every continent. It is disrupting national economies and affecting lives. Weather patterns are changing. Sea levels are rising. See, we are having two seasons in one season, and sea levels are rising, and weather events are becoming more extreme. Sometimes we feel rain in the rain in the other season. All the greenhouse gas emissions are projected to drop about 6% in 2020 due to travel bans and economic slowdowns resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. This improvement, we can say it's just temporary. Climate change is not on pause, not on pause. Once the global economy begins to recover, as International Monetary Fund and World Economic Forum and other all countries are now coming forward for financial recovery to combat post-pandemic complications of COVID-19, as well as its effect and impact on our lives. So once the global economy begins to recover from the pandemic, emissions are expected to return to higher levels. We want good expectation from this change. Saving lives and livelihood. See, most of uh, uh, focus point is saving livelihood and lives requires urgent action. Climate change affects the livelihood, most important thing, and we have to address both. We have to address regarding the pandemic issues as well as the climate emergency. So we have to know what was the agreement in 2015. The Paris Agreement, adopted in 2015, kindly note, in 2015, aims to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping a global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This was formed already. The agreement also aims to strengthen the ability of countries to deal with the impacts of climate change. It is also mentioned through appropriate financial flows, a new technology framework, and enhanced capacity building framework. We are talking about the 2015 adoption of Paris Agreement. It what I said, that all framed at that time. But what happened? It has got results. We are getting results, but not significant. We want best output and outcome from our actions. It is not easy to get results on climate emergencies. Because right now we have to think about the COVID-19 response also, because right now we are in the era of COVID-19. COVID is still not gone. We are still in the COVID era. So we have to focus on the COVID-19 response regarding our climate urgent actions. So as countries move towards rebuilding their economies after COVID-19, recovery plans can shape up the 21st century economy in various ways, are clean, green, healthy, safe, and more resilient. The current crisis is an opportunity for a profound systemic shift to a more sustainable economy that works for both people and planet. We have to focus these two P, people and planet. And third is peace. Peace, people, planet. And after all, what we want peace and harmony on the globe. If we're talking about the action of the government is taking sincere and serious actions. If we're talking about the United Nations General Assembly, United Nations General Assembly has proposed 6 climatic actions for governments. 6 climate action. I'm talking about 6. We have to follow this 6 climate action. Our biggest conference, Go Green, is going to be held in next month, and we welcome you all there. And our main focus is regarding the climate action. We are following the United Nations General Assembly's 6 actions. It has been given to all the countries, all the government stakeholders, as well as the NGOs and agencies and youth to take once they go about building back to their economies and societies. If we want to come in the good rhythm, we have to first think about the financial recovery with below 6 actions. So first is, now come to the solution. The first is green transition. Green transition. Investment must accelerate the decarbonization of all aspects of our economy. Green transition. Only remembering it. Green jobs and sustainable and inclusive growth. After all, we want inclusive growth because in sustainable development goals, the focus is on sustainability. So without inclusive growth, we will not get the sustainability. The third is green economy, making societies and people more resilient through a transition that is fair to all levels, that no one leaves no one behind. We have to focus common man, and we have to address all the issues regarding the green economy. Green economy, so green transition, green jobs, green economy. The fourth one is invest in sustainable solutions. Invest in sustainable solutions like fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies must end and polluters must pay for their pollution. So this is basic key points given by the United Nations General Assembly to all the government and stakeholders. And the fifth one is confront all climate risk. We have to maximum focus on the climate risks and we have to confront it. And the last and very important is cooperation. No country can succeed alone. So SDG 17, what is SDG 17? SDG 17 is a collaboration. So if we focus on the only SDG 13, we'll not get the total outcome from all the indicators of SDG 13 without integrating other SDG into SDG 13. In my new initiative, SDG Brigade India, we put 3I for youth: inform, inspire, integrate. We are coming forward and inviting youth to join with us and inform them, and then they engage, and then they involve, and then after involvement, they are inspiring now. and after inspiration, some sessions has been given to them, and then integration, we can say real integration start. If we if we want sustainability, we have to address all SDG 7, all 17 SDG parallel, not SDG 1 or 3 or 13. So to address the climate emergency, post pandemic recovery plans need to trigger long term systemic shifts that will change the trajectory of carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere. After all, we want to address climate action plans, but we have to focus post pandemic recovery plans first, right? Government around the world have spent considerable time and effort in recent years, and we are seeing that we are seeing now the results. Government also planning a safer develop plans to chart a safer and more sustainable future for their citizens. Taking this on board, now we come to the some action plans from my side. As I told, that green transition, green job, green economy, invest in sustainable solutions, confront all climate risks, and last is cooperation. This six is the key points from my session. You can say it's a key point from my session. And we all know from 90s, from early period, we are using reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle. So all the youth have to come forward for these actions. Sometimes youth are thinking about that my individual efforts, how can change the world, my individual efforts. So I am appealing individual efforts can contribute towards advancing SDGs. Our individual action can contribute significantly and positivity to sustainability, but our commitment is needed. United Nations asking commitment from each and every individual, and this globe is for our alls. This globe is meant for our peace, our harmony. So on today, on behalf of this nice arrange of a webinar, I appeal all the youth across the globe that we should know, we must come forward for combating this climate change, and we have to come in motion by following United Nations SDG 13 climate action changes actions, and we have to follow basic six action plans, and we will get definitely result. After all, we want global peace, harmony, and happiness. With all this, again, I thank you, organizers, especially Team Philippines, Niveda ji, and my all colleagues. And I again appeal all the delegates, all the researchers, all the academicians. Uh, let's come forward, do registration, and we have a very productive and a very good conference in next month. With all this, thank you very much from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhir Joshi, for your amazing talk, and you have spread a lot of message. I hope that has reached a lot of people, and especially the youth. So that's a humble message, and to all the youth who is watching us, to join hands with us in spreading and combating the climate change that we are facing today. So thank you so much, sir. And also the message of the 7 Go Green Summit that is happening next month. Let's all be part of it and take major actions in whatever way we can and combat climate change. Thank you so much, sir, for spending your time with us. So next, I would like to welcome our next eminent keynote speaker of the day, that is Mr. Ludwig Federigan from Philippines. Hello, sir. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Gisela. How is my audio? Is my audio clear?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Can I share screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I prepared a presentation for everyone this afternoon.
Oh, that's really nice.
Okay. Can you see the screen? Hold on. Let me just put it on presentation mode.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So, okay, thank you once again, Gisela. Okay, can I
Welcome, sir.
proceed?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you once again. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone in this Zoom room. Allow me first to extend my warmest gratitude to the organizing team of this webinar, and of course to all attendees who are very eager to listen on a very timely and important topic. For this afternoon, I wanted to share with you this topic, climate change, the Philippine experience. No? So our country, the Philippines, is currently in a state of public health emergency because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess this is not only the Philippines, but the entire world. But from where I am coming from, we're still in a period where there is a semi-lockdown because of the increase of the positive cases due to the Delta variant. As we work together towards putting an end to this particular challenge, we cannot afford to lose sight of the more disastrous and more lingering crisis the world has ever had, and that is the global climate emergency. Climate change is caused by the massive production of dangerous greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, among others, in the atmosphere that alter the global temperature. My slide is not working. Okay. The world will experience irreversible changes if the global temperature. Oh, sorry. This change results in rising sea levels and extreme weather events such as super typhoons, more heavy rains, and more intense heat and heat waves, prolonged and severe droughts, and consequently enormous losses in lives, livelihoods, properties, and the environment. Vulnerable countries bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change, including the Philippines. The world will experience irreversible changes if the global temperature rises beyond 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported that atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are now at levels unprecedented in at least the last 800,000 years. The IPCC also warned that the world cannot afford to keep emitting carbon dioxide as it has been doing in the recent years. Depending on mitigation decisions after 2030, they cumulatively track towards a warming of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures by the end of this century. Sea levels are expected to rise a further 26 to 82 centimeter by the year 2100, and the oceans have acidified, having absorbed about a third of the carbon dioxide emitted by human activities. We have seen many times the impact of natural hazards and the prevalence of disaster risk exacerbated by climate change. These disasters kill thousands of individuals, wipe out cities and communities, and undo years of development gains. Further, the year 2020 was dubbed one of the warmest years on record, with an average global temperature of about 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, despite a cooling effect of the La Nina phenomenon. The 6 warmest years on record have all been in the past 6 years, from the year 2015 to 2020, And the trend is set to continue in the next years due to the increasing heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Furthermore, according to the World Bank study, without effective mitigation measures, climate change could put more than 100 more million people into poverty by the year 2030. With all these grim scenarios, we need to push for our climate agenda forward to protect the interests of and deliver social justice to our most hit communities, even in the midst of a similarly daunting challenge like COVID-19. In the Philippines, the average annual mean temperature, according to our country's weather agency, will increase by 0.65 degrees Celsius since 1951, rising at an average rate of 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade, and is projected to increase by 1.7 to 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2050. Higher temperatures are generally expected for all regions of the country by 2050, the rates doubling compared to 2020 levels. Warming will be worst in Mindanao, considered to be the Philippine food basket. These causes drastic changes in weather patterns, an increase in frequency, intensity and duration of floods, and an increase in frequency and intensity of droughts in the face of climate change. The Philippines has been constantly on the top of the rankings of countries that suffered most from global warming. The 2021 Global Climate Risk Index has ranked the Philippines fourth among countries most affected by weather-related loss events from the year 2000 to the year 2019. Over 317 extreme weather events were recorded in the country from the 20-year period, the highest among the top 10 countries on the report. Over the last decades, the country has experienced extreme weather events that resulted in severe damage and losses, a phenomenon that scientists trace to global warming. These extremes include severe flooding during Typhoon Ondoy in 2019, devastating storm surges like Typhoon Yolanda in 2013, deadly landslides like what happened in St. Bernard in southern Leyte in 2006, and extreme droughts that happened in 1997 to 1998. Typhoons Ondoy, Pepeng, Sendong, Pablo, and Yolanda altogether have claimed the lives of at least 10,000 Filipinos and caused economic damage and losses amounting to 900 billion pesos. They have also severely affected areas in Mindanao historically not hit by strong typhoons. Specifically, the impacts of climate change in the Philippines would include the following. Changes in annual mean rainfall. Based on simulation exercises, projects the change in annual precipitation up to 16.4% by the year 2050. Increases in rainfall are particularly evident in most areas of Luzon and Visayas, while Mindanao is projected to undergo a drying trend. Average annual rainfall increases over most parts of the Luzon and Visayas is expected to be up to 16% by the year 2050. In contrast, there is a general reduction in regional annual average rainfall in Mindanao from 2 to 11% by the year 2050. Another impact is intense drought. A study from the weather agency of this country reveals that water collection in Angat Dam has decreased by 500 million cubic meters for the past 50 years. Next impact would be rising sea levels. Observed sea level rise is remarkably highest at 60 centimeters in the Philippines, about 3 times that of the global average or 19 centimeters. Given this, sea level rise increases the risk of flooding and storm damage. Projected impacts of 1 meter sea level rise in many areas of the country show vast portions being inundated, affecting coastal settlements and livelihoods. According to the entries of the Philippines National Mapping and Resource Information Authority, a 1 meter sea level rise can translate to an estimated land loss of 129,000 hectares. About 70% of the 1,500 municipalities in the Philippines are located along the coast and remains to be vulnerable to sea level rise. An Oxfam study found that sea level rise, floods that damage fish farms, and the increased acidification of the oceans could reduce farmed fish yield by as much as 90% by the year 2050. Food security threat: for every 1 degree Celsius rise in minimum temperature, rice plants have been shown to drop yield by as much as 10%. In the past, farmers in the Philippines had to stop growing rice completely during El Nino droughts. An Asian Development Bank report warns that rice production in the Philippines could drop by 50 to 70%, and climate change will cut agricultural crop yield and will eventually hike food prices. Next is the negative effects on forests and biodiversity. Philippine forests, host to a large variety of plant and animal species, have been declared as one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. The IPCC predicts that with a 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius in temperature in a span of 50 to 100 years, 30% of species would be at risk of extinction. A substantial increase in temperature can cause the migration of plant and animal species with narrower temperature tolerance to other more suitable areas as their form of adaptation. Most vulnerable are those species that have difficulties in migrating as a form of survival. Such temperature level rise may also disrupt species interactions like plants and pollinators' relationship that may affect the survival of plant species. Further increase in temperature may cause a number of animals and plant species to die out and become extinct, while critical habitats may be lost. Next would be damage to infrastructure. Infrastructure facilities are directly exposed to oftentimes prolonged and frequent rainfall, strong winds, and higher waves. Temperature variations that can lead to accelerated structural fatigue and materials failure, for example, in power transmission structures and road pavements, and places greater demands on the construction and operation and maintenance of flood control and drainage structure, seawalls and port structures, and public buildings such as schools and healthcare facilities. The impacts could be severe in areas where infrastructures are not designed to fully cope with the effects of climate change. Adverse effects on economic growth. Based on a study by the Asian Development Bank on the economics of climate change, the Philippines stands to lose 6% of its GDP annually until year 2100 if it disregards climate change risk. This same study found that if the Philippines would invest 0.5% of its GDP in climate change adaptation, it can avert losses of up to 4% of its GDP by the year 2100. Clearly a short-term investment with a long-term eightfold gain. A World Bank study, on the other hand, revealed that annual economic losses of the Philippines from disasters will total to $500 million US, or about 4% of the country's GDP. Energy technologies, particularly on power generation from renewable resources, rely greatly on the climate for its source. With projected changes in precipitation, humidity, wind speed, and cloudiness, energy technologies will be affected, resulting in changes in the quantity and timing of the renewable resource in its operational performance and energy reduction. Mitigation. Communities along coastal areas are directly impacted by extreme weather events and submerged by sea level rise and inundation. Such exposure and high vulnerability affect migration patterns in the country. These led to not only substantial socio-economic losses of coastal structures, but also displacement of the population and shift in livelihood sources and strategies. As people forge new ways of living, they also face increased vulnerabilities. Poverty. Economic status also influence level of vulnerability of people. Poverty limits the concerned population's capacity to bounce back immediately in the face of disasters or to shift rapidly to new adaptation modes that require financial resources to materialize. It is also a driver of rural to urban migration. Rural poor in lowland agricultural areas have also been migrating upwards to forest lands for better agricultural opportunities. This has further contributed to the situation of forests in the country's watershed. Of course, public health emergency, just like COVID-19, the health sector also stands to bear the brunt of climate change, as diseases, disabilities, and deaths are consequences of these hazards. The health sector is usually left to handle the management and rehabilitation of victims. Among the most likely impacts of climate change on the health sector include increases in endemic morbidity and mortality due to diarrhea disease, exacerbation of the abundance and or toxicity of cholera due to increases in coastal water temperature, and an expansion of the natural habitats of vector-borne and waterborne diseases. In 1998, when the Philippines experienced the strongest El Nino phenomenon to date, almost 40,000 dengue cases, 1,200 cholera cases, and nearly 1,000 typhoid fever cases were recorded nationwide. Climate change is a phenomenon that affects the entire Philippine population, rich and poor. We will be hard-pressed to address poverty, hunger and food sufficiency, health and safety, and many other societal and economic concerns if we treat climate change with a business as usual attitude. Scientists all over the world agree that it is imperative to limit the rise in global temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius if climate vulnerable countries like the Philippines are to survive and thrive. Doing so is crucial in reducing disaster risk and achieving the sustainable development goals. This compels government, not only in the Philippines, but globally, to bake in climate policy in our long-term development strategies while carrying out immediate risk-informed and evidence-based interventions. Hence, despite our very tiny carbon footprint, we are resolved to rise to 1.5 climate challenge. We are ready to heed the call for urgent and ambitious action. But of course, Philippines cannot do this alone. We need consolidated efforts from everyone and of course to our global friends. So how does Philippines pursue adaptation and mitigation? The increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will continue to influence changes in the global climate system in the coming decades. The IPCC establishes the urgency of climate change adaptation and mitigation, especially for developing countries and vulnerable countries like the Philippines. It recognizes its mutually beneficial relationship, particularly in the context of Philippine development. Of course, as we know, adaptation refers to the adjustment in natural or human system in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli or their effects, which moderates harm or exploits beneficial opportunities. With the Philippines' geophysical and socio-economic characteristics, more emphasis is given on adaptation to risk associated with current climate variability and extremes. Adaptation actions are urgently needed, particularly in highly vulnerable sectors such as food, agriculture, water, marine resources, biodiversity, and human health. On the other hand, mitigation refers to the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that prevents dangerous anthropogenic interface of the global climate system. As a response, it plays a key role, particularly in the context of historical emissions of industrialized countries. These would involve limiting or reducing anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions by sources and preserving, as appropriately, enhancing sinks and reservoir of greenhouse gases. Like most developing countries, the Philippines contribute to the total global greenhouse emissions is insignificant, less than 1% compared to the rest of the world. Nonetheless, as a party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the legally binding Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Philippines embarks on a mitigation strategy to contribute to the global effort to reduce emissions, pursuing cost-effective measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including increased energy efficiency and conservation, development and increased utilization of appropriate low-carbon and renewable energy technologies, and reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. The strategy shall take in the form of the nationally determined contribution, which reflects the recognition of the key role that countries play in ensuring that the global community can achieve the long-term objectives of mitigation. The Philippine NDC banners a strong commitment of 75% GHG emission reduction and avoidance by the year 2030 in recognition of the Paris Accord. Cognizance of the impacts of a changing climate on sectors that are sources of greenhouse gas emissions, which is agriculture, water, industry, transport, forestry, and energy, or we call it locally awit-fe. Mitigation is integrated and with adaptation and take into account the circumstances. Meanwhile, adaptation measures under the Philippine NDC that national government agencies will implement to enhance climate resilience of vulnerable communities include strengthen institutions and systems for modeling, scenario building, monitoring, and observation, implement a science-based climate disaster risk and vulnerability assessment process for programs and projects, develop climate and disaster resilient ecosystems, enhance the climate and disaster resilient of key sectors like agriculture, water, and health, transition to a climate and disaster resilient social and economic growth, research and development on climate change and impacts for improved risk assessment and management. The National Framework Strategy on Climate Change from the year 2010 until 2022 was formulated, which identified a long-term mitigation objective of facilitating the transition towards low greenhouse gas emissions for sustainable development. The Philippine National Climate Change Action Plan was also developed, which outlines the agenda for adaptation and mitigation from the year 2011 until 2028 in 7 strategic priorities areas. Such an approach to mitigation, anchored on the pursuit of sustainable development, gives the country the opportunity to leapfrog into the future and avoid harmful emissions as the economy grows. Mitigation strategies in the Philippine development offer opportunities for enhancing development and boosting the adaptation capacity of communities. In the same vein, adaptation is as much a development concern as mitigation. With a global scale shift in the climate system, development can only succeed if mitigation strategies such as energy efficiency and conservation, renewable energy development, environmentally sustainable transport, and sustainable infrastructure are undertaken in the context of adaptation. Our integrated approach builds on mitigation measures as a part of adaptation in order to provide necessary mechanisms to respond to the realities of climate change and create an enabling policy environment for strengthening the country's pursuit of sustainable development and fulfillment of the sustainable development targets. In closing, transitioning away from the practices established by decades of industrial development might be a tough task, but there are many steps we can take towards mitigating and adapting to climate change. We need to stage a recovery that values the intrinsic link between human health and the state of our environment. We need to build a better economic system that is more resilient to facing pandemics, climate change, and other emerging global challenges. The resolute and urgent global response to the pandemic demonstrated the remarkable capacity of human society to put the emergency brake on business as usual. It showed that we can act as one and radically change our ways and our systems to contain the rapid spread of a deadly virus for the greater good of all. The same unity, resolve, and urgency we should apply in combating the climate emergency, in disaster response, and in pursuing low carbon and sustainable development. The higher value is in the nobility of purpose to improve the quality of life of the people and to build a sustainable and resilient human society. Through this forum and beyond, let us learn from one another, support each other's climate actions, advise on strategies, and strike convergence where possible. We in the Philippines are looking forward and stand ready for more meaningful partnerships and initiatives with any one of you here for a safer and more resilient future for everyone and for our communities in general. Thank you for your kind attention. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Ludwig, for your amazing presentation. It was very inspiring and a lot of information. Thank you so much for being part of this awareness program. You have given us a lot of inputs. So before we wind up, we have a few questions from some of our attendees, and I would like to shoot these questions to our keynote speakers. We'll try to answer as however possible. So we have a question from Dr. Mohammed Taibur Rahman, who would like to know what is the best way to disaster risk reduction, DRR, in climate resilience issues. Mr. Ludwig or Dr. Joshi, do you have any answers for the question?
Ludwig, sir, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Dr. Sudhir. No? Perhaps in my context, one of the first things communities have to do is to conduct what we call a climate and disaster risk assessment, so that they're able to identify the risk of their community and the vulnerability of the people in a particular community. And this assessment, at least in the Philippine context, this assessment, we use this actually as a guiding document to provide planning, no, in the municipal level. And when I talk of planning, this would include development plans, this include land use plan, and also disaster risk and reduction management plan. No? So these are very important data that communities can have, no, in their development planning.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your response. Next, we have another question. Similar to what we are facing currently in Philippines, we have a question from Lake Wong, who said they do have similar issues of poverty due to the pandemic and climate change. And the people have been consuming pack, and this is getting worse due to climate change. So do we have any solution to solve this problem in their country?
Can I?
Sure.
So in my speech, I already told that 6 action plan has been given by the United Nations General Assembly. So we can say green jobs and sustainable and inclusive growth. If we focus on the livelihoods and common man, we have to apply this action plan, green jobs and sustainable and inclusive growth, as well as green economy also. And invest in sustainable solution is also a way to bring harmony, to bring more opportunity of employment in all sectors. Green transition is also a part of it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhir Joshi, for your answer. And next, we have a question from Dr. Rashmi Sharma, who has asked what steps should be taken to mitigate climate change in deserts where water is scarce. Do we have any answer for the question?
Jessica, can you repeat the question again?
Ludwig, sir. Ludwig.
Yeah. What kind of actions we can take to mitigate climate change in water scarce places like deserts?
Okay, let me get the context of the question. No? Mitigate climate change in water scarce locations. Is that the exact question?
Yes.
Okay, let me just use it in the Philippine context, no? Because of course, although Philippines, I think we do not have any desert, no? But of course, there are areas we experienced rising temperature, including dry season. No? Like for example, right now I am doing a study in 2 municipalities down south in the Philippines. No, these are actually predominantly Muslim territories. No, and these municipalities are experiencing on one side they're experiencing flood. On the other side, they're experiencing drought. No? Flood, even in the case of the short rainfall, not even typhoons, they would experience it. No? Of course, drought, they also do experience drought, even there is no El Nino, no, visiting that area. So much more on El Nino phenomenon incident, they would experience more drought. No? So one of the things that we felt that we recommended on how communities, if there are communities in that particular area, to become resilient to this type of hazards. Of course, there are a lot of the literature would say different suggestions. But in the Philippine context, number one, of course, in every place, water is very important. No, water is really very important. So if there are communities in your water scarce places, in the Philippines, we have a law which we call rainwater harvesting law, where every small unit of the municipality or every barangay, we call it barangay, should install a rainwater catchment, no, in every barangay. No? So there is one particular solution, no, in areas where drought would mostly hit them. No? Secondly, if these areas are agricultural land, and of course there is challenge in terms of water. Perhaps in the Philippines, we also do this, no, through the Department of Agriculture. They provide seedlings that are drought resilient, no, or temperature or high temperature resilient seedlings, no, so that these areas which are, but of course desert is not agriculture. For agricultural areas, farmers and the local people can use. That's all, Gisela.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your amazing answer. We'll take up one last question that is again from Dr. Rashmi Sharma, who would like to know how we can produce energy or electricity from plastic or garbage. I'll repeat the question. Her question is how we can produce energy or electricity from plastic or garbage.
Gisela, can I take that?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes,
sure.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
There is, of course, we know the WTE or waste to energy technology. But like, for example, in the Philippines, this is quite controversial because we have an existing law that bans incineration, no? And that would include waste to energy technology. Because in the Philippines, we have a law which we call the Clean Air Act, no, which bans incineration. So which means open burning is totally banned anywhere in this country. Last night while attending my class, no, there is one group of students who was proposing it looks like a waste to energy technology, but it origins actually in India, no, and it was invented by an Indian. I forgot his first name, but his last name is Jain, Jain, no? And yeah, and actually this person is installing small capacity biomass plants, no? I think I really forgot what part of India. No, I can ask that from the students, no, and one of the students in the class was actually thinking of importing this kind of technology to the Philippines, no, and in fact, according to them, they're already in discussion with the inventor of this technology. That's all, Gisela.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Ludwig, for your answer. So with this, we come to the end of our webinar. So before we wind up, we can have a group picture. So interested participants can share your screen to click on the picture. So, yes. Okay, just a moment. So here we go, 1, 2, and 3. Yes, thank you all for being part of this webinar and helping us spread awareness on climate change insights 2021. So I would also like to bring into your notice that the 7th Go Green Summit, the last dates for abstract submissions and registration deadlines are coming soon. So if you're an active climate activist or environmentalist interested in joining us, please do register. We have given the registration links, and share your inputs on climate change so that we can make a difference and bring about actions together. So thank you all once again. And thank you to Mr. Ludwig and Dr. Sudhir Joshi for giving great inputs on climate change and coordinating with ISERS in bringing about this webinar. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a nice day.
Gisela, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Yes, please.
Is it possible to request for a copy of the recording? I think
Sure.
there's still
Yes,
questions in the chat box, and
okay.
I'll pick up some of the questions so I'll be able to answer them.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. We'll be streaming the recorded webinar on the ISCR's YouTube channel. We'll be sharing it with all the registrants, and we'll be also streaming them on the Bioleagues YouTube channel as well. And as per your request, yes, we can take few questions if time limits. So we have answered most of the questions, Mr. Ludwig, the important ones. And yes, maybe we have a final question from Dr. Lakshman Langde, who has a question: what are the impact of climate change in evolution of various microbes that cause disease in human civilization, flora and fauna of the world? I repeat the question: what are the impact of climate change in evolution of various microbes that cause disease in human civilization, flora and fauna of the world?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. But I have to apologize because I am not a medical doctor. No, my background is at least the science of climate. But let me just share this with you. When I heard this in some of the epidemiologists, not only local but global, they said that there are over 1,000 more viruses that remains to be undiscovered by human society. So perhaps COVID is just one of them. So if we continue with our current lifestyle right now, we may still be able to discover other similar COVID pandemics, no, that may happen to human society. So this may not be the last. No? So it's really very important, not only very important, extremely important that given this COVID, we really have to be prepared, no, for succeeding pandemics that may happen both locally and globally. I hope I answered your question, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Ludwig. Due to time limitations, we have to wind up the webinar. So we'll come up with more of these kind of interesting topics through ISCRS. So do subscribe to the channel. So thank you so much all once again. Good day.